Why don't you think that the BLM should weigh in on this proposal that would have sold all the natural assets to the BLM lands to, say, China?
Again, I'm not familiar with the content of the proposal,
So the
only from what
BLM
I've
is
read in the
just not
popular
taking a
media.
position?
But
The BLM is just...
we in all our land management work are committed to following the law and meeting the tenets of our multiple use and sustained yield mandate.
Okay, Mr. Wachowski, do you believe that just perhaps our foreign adversaries would have a reason to cripple our access to raw materials needed for legitimate economic development? Don't you think that would be something that our foreign adversaries would want?
Congresswoman, I'm here today to represent the Bureau of Land Management, so that's outside of my area of expertise.
Well, the BLM is where we access coal and oil and gas. It's where we have grazing rights in Trona. It can't be outside of your expertise. That's what we do on our BLM lands.
What you just watched is exactly why moments like this matter. Representative Harriet Hageman did not just question a policy. Harriet Hageman confronted what could have been a major shift in how America's natural resources are controlled. And the response from the Bureau of Land Management official? The deflection, the careful wording, the repeated no engagement? That says a lot. This was not some small technical adjustment. This was about whether America's natural assets could be packaged, listed on the New York Stock Exchange, and opened up to investors, including foreign governments, under the label of natural asset companies. And Harriet Hageman was not backing down. Welcome back to Congress Lens. I'm Audrey, and today we are breaking down Harriet Hageman's direct exchange with a key Biden administration official over the SEC's now withdrawn natural asset companies proposal. If you believe America's land and resources deserve serious oversight, tap the like button, subscribe to Congress Lens, and let's get into what really happened here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In October 2023, the SEC proposed a rule to approve the New York Stock Exchange's request to list natural asset companies. I led out on a letter to the SEC with 31 other members in the House expressing strong opposition to the process and the proposal itself. Thousands of stakeholders across the country wrote to the SEC in opposition to this proposal due to the surrendering of local control to elite investors, radical environmental groups, and even foreign governments. Briefly, NACs would have prohibited the, quote, unsustainable activities on public and private lands. In bureaucratic language, this is code for blocking all legitimate economic development, including energy development, food production, grazing, logging, and access to other raw materials needed for housing and industrial construction. In short, what NACs would do would be to allow someone like Bill Gates to buy the natural assets of, say, Shoshone National Forest in the state of Wyoming and block essentially all access, management, and use to that resource. But not just someone with billions of dollars such as Bill Gates. It would also allow China, Venezuela, Iran, Russia, other malign actors from purchasing the natural assets of these lands, both federal lands, BLM, U.S. Forest Service, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service lands, but it also would apply to private lands or any private lands who had conservation easements on them. So those farmers and ranchers who had placed conservation easements on their property could wake up one day and be in partnership with the Chinese Communist Party. Obviously, this is something that was one of the most dangerous rules I have ever seen, and I am pleased that the New York Stock Exchange saw the light and withdrew it. But Mr. Wachowski, I just have a couple of questions for you. I know you weren't involved in the SEC's proposal, but I'm highlighting these concerns because the BLM is responsible for the management and mismanagement of these resources on 10% of this country's acreage. And I can't even imagine that the BLM would think that the SEC's or the New York Stock Exchange's proposal was appropriate or that it would be a good thing to do. Do you know whether the BLM weighed in with the SEC challenging the SEC or the New York Stock Exchange's ability to sell the natural assets of BLM lands?
Congresswoman, my understanding is that the department has been clear that we had no engagement with the SEC on this proposal.
So you had no engagement with the SEC at all? The SEC never contacted the BLM and said, we're going to sell your, or the New York Stock Exchange? They didn't contact you and say, we're going to sell the natural assets to the BLM lands?
Congresswoman, I have to refer you to the SEC for how they go about their
No,
public
I'm
comment
asking the
processes.
BLM.
As I noted, the department has had no engagement with the SEC on this withdrawn proposal.
Interesting. Did you call them up and say, we don't like this idea?
Again, Congresswoman, we have not had any engagement with the SEC on this
So
withdrawn proposal.
why don't you think that the BLM should weigh in on this proposal that would have sold all the natural assets to the BLM lands to, say, China?
Again, I'm not familiar with the content of the proposal,
So the
only from what
BLM
I've
is
read in the
just not
popular
taking a
media.
position?
But
The BLM is just-
we and all our land management work are committed to following the law and meeting the tenets of our multiple use and sustained yield mandate.
Okay, Mr. Wykowski, do you believe that just perhaps our foreign adversaries would have a reason to cripple our access to raw materials needed for legitimate economic development? Don't you think that would be something that our foreign adversaries would want?
Congresswoman, I'm here today to represent the Bureau of Land Management, so that's outside of my area of expertise.
Well, the BLM is where we access coal and oil and gas. It's where we have grazing rights in Trona. It can't be outside of your expertise. That's what we do on our BLM lands.
And certainly we're committed to meeting all those multiple uses on the public lands through our management.
In the case of the New York Stock Exchange's proposal, they didn't include any kind of investment exclusion for foreign adversaries. In fact, the Intrinsic Exchange Group, who worked closely with the New York Stock Exchange, explicitly stated that foreign governments could invest in these NACs. They're not just okay with it, they actually extended the invitation. So I think that that's of grave concern and something that the American people should understand, that the New York Stock Exchange, along with the SEC, were inviting foreign governments to come in and purchasing, for example, the natural assets associated with all of our BLM lands. But I also think it's important for the American people to understand that the BLM did nothing to push back on that kind of a radical idea. With that, I yield back.
All right, now that we've watched the full exchange, let's talk about it. First, Harriet Hageman came prepared. Harriet Hageman laid out the timeline clearly. October 2023, the SEC proposal, the New York Stock Exchange request, and the natural asset company structure. This was not random outrage. This was detailed and specific. Harriet Hageman focused on one key phrase in the proposal: unsustainable activities. On paper, that sounds reasonable, but Harriet Hageman translated that into real-world impact. Energy development, grazing, logging, food production, mining, the economic backbone of many communities, especially in states like Wyoming. That is where this gets serious. The Bureau of Land Management oversees about 10% of the country's land. That includes oil, gas, coal, grazing rights, and mineral resources. These are not abstract environmental concepts. These are strategic assets tied to jobs, infrastructure, and national security. So when Harriet Hageman asked whether the BLM engaged with the SEC before this proposal advanced, the answer was shocking. No engagement, no consultation, no pushback. Harriet Hageman kept pressing. Did the SEC contact the BLM? Did the BLM contact the SEC? Was there any effort to weigh in on a proposal that could affect federally managed lands? Again, no engagement. That is the heart of this exchange. Harriet Hageman also raised concerns about foreign adversaries being allowed to invest in these natural asset companies. Harriet Hageman referenced statements indicating foreign governments could participate. That alone raises serious questions. Even though the New York Stock Exchange eventually withdrew the proposal, Harriet Hageman made it clear that the fact it progressed as far as it did without agency input is troubling. In my opinion, Harriet Hageman is right to ask these questions. If a financial structure could potentially affect federal land management, the agency responsible for that land should at least be aware of it. Coordination should not be optional when it comes to national resources. What stood out to me most was Harriet Hageman's focus on local control. Farmers, ranchers, and private landowners with conservation easements were part of the concern. Harriet Hageman argued that some landowners could indirectly find themselves tied to foreign investors through complex financial arrangements. Whether you agree with every scenario presented, the broader concern about transparency and sovereignty is valid. This hearing was not just about one proposal. It was about oversight. It was about whether agencies are actively protecting the resources they manage. Harriet Hageman forced that conversation, and the repeated no engagement responses did not inspire confidence. These are the kinds of exchanges that matter because they reveal how government agencies coordinate, or fail to coordinate on major issues. Now I want to hear from you. Do you think agencies like the BLM should automatically weigh in on proposals that could impact federally managed land? Or do you think this concern was overstated? Drop your thoughts in the comments. If you appreciate thoughtful breakdowns like this, subscribe to Congress Lens. I'm Audrey, and I'll see you in the next one.